I could never have imagined that my husband would turn into a complete stranger. When I met Jason Miller, he was a modest and thoughtful high school math teacher. A slightly goofy pair of glasses and a love for dry toast were his only distinguishing features. I was working at the local library then, trying to recover from a recent family tragedy. There was no ostentatious luxury, but we seemed made for each other. We lived in our modest New York State home for almost 20 years. Our life flowed quietly and predictably, like a calm river. I gave up my career fairly early on. We decided that his salary would be enough for our unpretentious life, and I would take care of the house. I cooked, cleaned, and cared for his ailing mother. I carefully watched our savings, clipped coupons, and never allowed myself to buy a new dress without thinking about it for several days. It wasn't easy, but I firmly believed in fidelity. I believed in us. And then, one Tuesday in March, everything collapsed. It all started with a lottery ticket. He bought it at the gas station along with a carton of milk. I remember it like it was yesterday because he forgot to buy eggs, and I was a little annoyed. We started scratching off the coating right on the kitchen table. At first, I didn't even pay attention until he suddenly froze. Then he stood up abruptly, clutching the ticket so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He looked at me as if he had seen Providence itself. 10 million, he whispered, breathless with excitement. I laughed. I thought it was just a silly joke. But it wasn't a joke. By the end of the week, the lottery had delivered its verdict. After taxes, we had more than $6 million in cash in our hands. And at that moment, the life I knew crumbled to dust. At first, I imagined pictures of our shared future. I dreamed of a quiet cottage in Vermont, a small bookstore where I could spend my time, and finally, travel. I imagined how we would celebrate this victory, make plans, hold hands, and bask in the glow of delight together. But Jason Miller had completely different ideas. Not even a week went by before he quit his job without a word. He abandoned his old sweaters and spent nights studying real estate websites. He started hanging out with people I had never seen. He drank more, laughed louder, as if on purpose. One evening, I went downstairs to the kitchen and accidentally overheard his phone conversation. "Finally free?" came the voice on the line. I didn't make a scene, didn't question him. "It's not time yet," I told myself, blaming everything on stress, nerves, or an inappropriate surge of euphoria. But the real blow came on a Sunday morning. I had just made his favorite French toast when he came downstairs in a custom-made suit that I had never seen before and said without a hint of doubt, "I'm rich now. I don't need a housewife anymore." I thought I misheard. He sat calmly at the table, sipping coffee, and continued as if reading from a script. "You were good when we had nothing, but I'm not going to live like a schoolteacher anymore. You just don't fit into my new life." He wanted me to leave. Just like that. No discussions, no warnings, not even tears. There wasn't a trace of regret in his eyes, only cold calculation. He gave me a sentence: 30 days to move out. I didn't shed a tear in his presence. The following days turned into a surreal nightmare. I wandered around our, now only his, house like a lost soul. I touched the polished furniture with my palms, sorted through the sheets that had been washed countless times by my hands. I tried my best not to hear Jason Miller ruthlessly discussing the upcoming repairs, the choice of contractors, and planning luxurious trips on the phone, trips where I no longer had a place. Not a single scream, not a flash of anger. His cruelty was precise, sterile, like a scalpel blade, cold accurate, and utterly merciless. He started throwing parties, filling the house with laughing women with unnaturally bright makeup and men with predatory smiles. "Don't let them see you," he snapped at me. And I would go to my room, lock myself in, clutching a hot cup of tea with trembling hands, trying to quell the chills. Secretly, furtively, I began to pack my things. Only the bare necessities. A few boxes, books, like fragments of my soul, letters from my mother, keeping the warmth of her love, a watercolor with 2 doves, a gift from Jason Miller's mother, made shortly before her death. I doubt he even remembered her existence. And I started writing. At first, incoherently, desperately, obeying only an inner voice, insisting on the need to pour the pain onto paper. In a dusty diary, hidden deep in my nightstand, I maniacally recorded every detail of his behavior. Every expense, every dropped name, every minute detail hinting at the storm hidden beneath the mask of well-being. I didn't know why I needed it, but instinct told me to write everything down. And so, 2 weeks later, Jason Miller brought a woman into the house. In broad daylight. She was in her early 30s, with vulgar platinum hair, and her stilettos, clicking on the parquet floor, sounded like a brazen challenge. He introduced her as a realtor, supposedly helping me with renovations. She didn't even deign to look at me. That same night, as if in passing, he announced the sale of the house. Quietly, almost in a whisper, I asked, "Where will I go?" In response, only a sip of wine and an indifferent shrug. "Figure it out yourself," he tossed out. That night, I fell asleep early, but not from exhaustion. My heart was pounding like a drum before an attack. I stared at the ceiling and felt something inside me changing. Not breaking, no. Hardening, like stone cooling in hellfire. If he thought I would disappear, quietly tucking my tail between my legs, he didn't know me at all. The next day, I was already sitting in front of Marcy, a retired accountant I had met at church years ago. She never had much glamour, but she always had a sharp mind and straightforwardness. I decided to tell her part of my story. Not all of it, of course, not yet. But even that was enough to make her raise her eyebrows in surprise and lean forward in her chair. Marcy agreed to help me examine the available financial documents. Jason Miller, I knew, never paid attention to pop-up notifications. He was too busy measuring the living room, figuring out how to fit a grand piano that he would never play. Marcy turned out to be even more helpful than I had anticipated, and more cautious than I had expected. She looked me straight in the eye and said sharply, "Men like Jason Miller don't change overnight. Money didn't corrupt him. It just gave him carte blanche." I didn't want to believe it, but her words painfully resonated in the depths of my soul, in the part I was afraid to look into. Maybe the man I married had always been like this. Maybe I just wasn't important enough for him to show his true face. We delved into the labyrinths of bank statements, piles of credit card bills, and dusty stacks of old tax returns. Marcy patiently explained how to request credit reports, mine and his, and what to look for. Joint accounts were still smoldering, but he was already forging new financial paths, leading alone. Formally, clean, but my heart told me a storm was brewing. He wasn't covering his tracks, as if confident that I was absorbed in routine and wouldn't notice anything. "Act fast," Marcy whispered, but quietly. "Don't let him know you're onto him. That's when people like him lose their vigilance and become dangerous." I nodded frantically, a lump of fear constricting my throat. But the numbness receded. At home, Jason Miller turned into a shadow, a ghost in his own house. He moved to the guest bedroom without waiting for me to ask. "I need space to think," he tossed out, avoiding my gaze. I stopped cooking for him, but he didn't seem to notice or simply didn't care. One morning, entering the kitchen, I froze in the doorway. In my old robe, which I hadn't worn in a long time but kept carefully in the linen closet, stood a woman. She casually poured herself coffee, as if everything here was familiar to her. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't utter a word. "Oh, hi," she chirped, tucking a strand of dyed red hair behind her ear. "You must be the ex." There wasn't a hint of embarrassment in her voice, only condescending curiosity. I remained silent. But silence didn't save me. That same day, Jason Miller, like a predator, cornered me in the hallway. His voice was cold and even, like the blade of a knife. "Don't complicate things," he hissed. "I've given you plenty of time. We both know you'll make it. You always have." And then it was like I was struck by lightning. It dawned on me. His cruelty isn't hatred. It's something much worse. He stopped seeing me as a person. I had become an annoying nuisance, a stain to be erased from his perfect new life. At that moment, I made a decision. I'm leaving, but on my terms. As if preparing for a chess game, I went to our old storage unit. There, in the dust and semi-darkness, I found it. A locked metal box that I hadn't touched for more than 10 years. Inside, documents, certificates, yellowed copies of receipts. The remnants of my small, unblossomed business. The one that Jason once discouraged me from. For some reason, I kept these papers. And now they seemed unbearably heavy, like a burden of responsibility that I had carried for so long. I dialed Marcy's number. "I think I want to go back to what I buried too soon," I said, trying to put confidence in my voice. "Go back to my past." There was a pause on the line. "Are you thinking of doing something?" Marcy asked cautiously. "I think I already have," I replied, and for the first time in a long time, steel rang in my voice. That night, I watched Jason from the window of a back room. He was sprawled on the couch, laughing with that woman, wearing my robe. They were watching some comedy on TV. His face radiated smugness. He was pleased with himself. And, strangely, I didn't feel anger. Only a cold, all-consuming readiness. Readiness to act. Kindred Pages was my little secret, a dream grown from quiet evenings, notebooks filled with hopes and sketches, custom notebooks, handmade journals. I poured my soul into it. But it had only been a few months when Jason Miller, with the air of a caring husband, convinced me that the money wasn't worth the stress and made me close the business. Back then, I believed he was just protecting me. Now I understand. He simply wanted me to stay small, under his control. But I kept everything. Every supplier contact, every template, the list of initial clients, even the folder with sketches I was afraid to show anyone. And so, with Marcy, we began to rebuild my dream, brick by brick. She introduced me to her friend Sarah, a former print shop manager who had gone freelance. Sarah offered to help with new samples. No one knew, not Jason Miller, nor anyone from our past life. I worked quietly, like a mouse, methodically, sometimes at Marcy's kitchen table, sometimes in the basement of the local community center. Jason Miller, it seemed, was spiraling upwards, though it felt more like a freefall. He bought a fancy car he couldn't handle, wrecking it as if it were a minor inconvenience. Then he invested a fortune in some crypto nonsense because some slick guy at a cigar club declared it the new gold mine. I overheard him bragging to a neighbor about buying a house on the Florida coast, which he hadn't even bothered to see with his own eyes. He presented every action as a triumph, but to me, it looked like desperation, draped in gold chains. And then the for sale sign appeared on our lawn. I stumbled upon the photos before he deigned to talk to me. He contacted a local agency, and they put pictures of every room online. My gaze was glued to the screen when I saw the bedroom. My old comforter, cozy and familiar, was still neatly folded at the foot of the bed. He hadn't even bothered to remove it before showing it off to strangers. That day, the realtor brought potential buyers. I sat on the porch swing, trying not to draw attention, with a book on my lap, pretending to be engrossed in reading. The woman from the couple noticed me and smiled timidly. "She's just a renter," the agent hissed, trying to speak louder than necessary. "She'll be gone soon." The words felt like a sentence, as if I was being erased from the face of the earth. That night, I sought refuge at Marcy's. She, as always, greeted me with warmth and a cup of fragrant tea. Then, like a magician, she pulled a single sheet of paper from under a stack of documents. "You said you already had a name for the business, remember? I took care of everything. It's yours again now." My attention was drawn to the printout. Kindred Pages, LLC. My signature at the bottom. For the first time in months, tears welled up in my eyes, but these were tears of healing, not pain. I suddenly remembered the woman I was before Jason Miller systematically destroyed me. I left our house 2 days before his ultimatum. Not because he demanded it, but because I couldn't stay there any longer. The house had ceased to be a home, turning into an empty backdrop for his new life. A soulless showroom where every object gleamed with false brilliance and promises dissolved into the air before they could even leave his lips. He didn't even bother to help me carry a single box. Didn't ask where I was going. He just indifferently tossed the car keys into the crystal vase by the door and muttered, "Take care." I lived with Marcy for several weeks. She offered me the guest room, and I accepted her generous offer without hesitation. I was grateful, but inside me, a fire of new purpose was already burning. During the day, I immersed myself in working on the business, and at night, armed with a pen and notebook, I wrote down goals. Not dreams, but clear, concrete goals. And methodically, one by one, I crossed them off, moving closer to my new reality. On Sunday evening, the Kindred Pages website launched. Simple, concise design, warm tones, elegant fonts. I posted photos of handmade journals, cards, and keepsake boxes, which Sarah helped me create. I decided not to show my face yet. Not the right time. I wasn't seeking recognition. I needed results. And then something unexpected happened. An influencer, a woman whose face was vaguely familiar from our hometown, now living in sunny California, shared a post about our shop. She had ordered a memorial journal for her mother and recorded an unboxing video that was deeply moving. "It's just incredible," she whispered, barely holding back tears. It felt like the person who created it had poured a piece of their soul into every inch. And then the orders came pouring in like a horn of plenty. Sarah and I could barely keep up with the workload. Marcy, taking on the accounting, gently warned me against rash decisions, reminding me that success shouldn't go to my head and push me to expand too quickly. "Sustainability," she said with firm conviction in her voice, "that's true strength." Jason Miller only called once. He left a message, his voice sounding detached and indifferent. "Hi, just wanted to make sure you got all your stuff and didn't leave your blue kettle. The realtor wants the kitchen to be clean." I didn't reply. But one evening, unable to resist, I drove to the house and parked across the street in Marcy's car. Lights were on in the windows. Inside, silhouettes flickered. There was movement, laughter. It looked like a party. Unfamiliar faces in what was once my home. And then the sign disappeared too. The house was sold. In theory, I should have felt pain, sharp, tearing. But instead, I felt relief, as if an unbearable weight, whose existence I hadn't even suspected, had been lifted from my shoulders. At the end of that week, a phone call from Sarah caught me off guard. Her voice was filled with undisguised panic. "Have you seen the news?" she blurted out. "Jason Miller's crypto empire has collapsed." She was gasping with indignation. Apparently, there's some kind of fraud. He's gotten into a lawsuit with some guy from Miami. It's all over the local Twitter accounts. I didn't rush to the screen, giving in to curiosity. There wasn't a trace of schadenfreude in me. I simply returned to my desk, took a new pen from the drawer, and opened a clean page in my journal. "Things I built without permission," I wrote in calligraphic script. Jason Miller had money, but I had a foundation, earned with every brick. I rented a small, cozy cottage on the outskirts of town. 2 bedrooms, floors that sang their creaky song with every step, and a porch that echoed the wind with a mournful moan. Yes, it was far from luxury, but it was mine. I personally painted the kitchen in a warm, soothing shade of sage and filled the shelves with mugs lovingly collected from thrift stores. Every corner of this house felt like a return to myself, a healing of the soul. Orders continued to come in, like a flood that threatened to overwhelm us. We could no longer cope with manual production. Then Sarah suggested producing limited edition products that looked like they were handmade, but were actually produced in small batches. I had doubts. Was it a betrayal of my principles? A compromise with my conscience, or a reasonable scaling? Marcy, as always, brought me back down to earth, reminding me that you have to survive first, and elegance will follow. And I, giving in to the pressure of reality, agreed. We turned to a modest family workshop that the pandemic had almost driven to ruin. When we signed the contract, the owners, quiet and hard-working people, couldn't hold back tears of joy. I cried too, but alone, away from prying eyes. One morning, taping up another package, I received a message in the store's Instagram account. "Is this the same Emma who used to live with Jason Miller? If so, I want to say that what you're doing is incredible. I saw him on the news yesterday, and believe me, you came out the winner in this story." I froze, staring at the phone screen. Jason? On the news? Turning off notifications, I grabbed my laptop, and there he was, standing, rooted to the spot, in front of a reporter outside the county courthouse. The perfectly tailored suit was gone. He looked puffy, beads of sweat glistening on his temple. The headline screamed, "Local lottery winner claims to be victim of financial guru's scam. Files lawsuit after losing millions." The video started. Jason Miller, with irritation in his voice, explained how he had been misled, introduced to someone in the upper investment circles, and how he had temporarily liquidated assets to fund innovative ventures. His speech was rambling, full of boasting and accusations. The comments under the video were merciless. "If you're stupid enough to give a stranger $4 million, you're not a victim. You're an idiot. He probably thought money would make him smart. I can imagine what it's like to lose the jackpot and the wife." Cruel. Terribly cruel. I slammed the laptop shut, and a shiver ran through my arms. But it wasn't fear. It was crystal clarity. Jason Miller, absorbed in destroying our shared assets, had no idea that I, in turn, had strengthened my own position. Since I left, I hadn't touched our joint account once. Well, almost never. Once secretly, I paid off the rest of my student loan. Technically, I still had access. He, in his arrogance and absent-mindedness, had never bothered to remove me. I left everything else untouched. Marcy, my faithful friend, helped me put everything into a trust, quietly, legally, discreetly. In the evening, I received a call from Cassie, a realtor I hadn't spoken to in ages. Her voice had a professional politeness, but there was something else underneath. Curiosity. "Emma, hi. Hope you're doing well. I heard a rumor that you're planning to invest in real estate. Is that true?" I paused and smiled. "Yes, Cassie, quite possibly." We met at a quiet cafe the following Thursday. Cassie was wearing an elegant beige trench coat with a tablet in hand and a stack of property listings. She immediately got down to business, piercing me with a gaze that held no malice, only professional interest. "You're not just window shopping, are you?" I stirred my tea and replied with firmness. "No, I'm ready to act, and I want something with history." A satisfied smile flickered across Cassie's face. "Most clients prefer modern style or something easy to maintain. But I like your approach. History has character." Cassie spread out the flyers in front of me. Modest townhouses, cozy lakeside cottages, even a converted barn. I nodded politely, but none of the options touched my heart. Not right. I leaned forward, placing my hand on the table. "Actually, I have something specific in mind. The listing appeared several months ago. Most likely the deal is already closed, but I heard a rumor that the buyer had financing issues." Cassie raised her eyebrows. "And what is it?" 47 South Wilton Avenue. She blinked as if not believing her ears. "Jason Miller's house?" I remained impassive. "I lived there for 20 years. A thick, tense silence hung in the air. Cassie slowly closed her tablet. "Emma, I don't want to pry, but why do you want that house after everything?" Her voice held genuine bewilderment. I took a sip of tea, trying to hide my agitation. "Because the problem was never the house. The problem was him." She didn't argue. She simply nodded, opened her email client, and started typing. 2 days later, the phone rang. "You were right. The buyer backed out. The house is back on the market. But quietly, Jason Miller is trying to avoid publicity. He lowered the price." "How bad is it?" I asked, burning with impatience. "He's desperate, Emma. He can't pay the property taxes. Because of the Florida debacle, lawsuits, and tax debts, he's on the verge of bankruptcy. You can name almost any price." Her voice was filled with undisguised pity. I arrived on Sunday, toward evening, and parked a little ways away, a couple of houses from my destination. Overgrown lawn, peeling shutters. A broken garden lamp hung helplessly from its post, like a loose tooth. Jason Miller had tried to breathe life into this house, fill it with the clatter of money and wild parties, but without proper care, even the most luxurious mansions fall into disrepair. I entered. Cassie followed close behind. Inside, it smelled musty and of cheap men's cologne. There was a sense of hopelessness. Empty rooms, no furniture, only echoes and dust bunnies. But I felt no regret. On the contrary, I saw enormous potential. "I want it," I said firmly. Cassie's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you sure?" "I'm not buying memories," I replied. "I'm buying a blank canvas, and I know exactly what I'm going to paint on it." On Tuesday, my offer was on the table, and on Friday, it was accepted. Cassie called me, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and excitement. He didn't even haggle. He just wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible. I didn't smile. Not yet. The smile came later, when I stood in the center of the spacious foyer, keys in hand, and remembered all those times he ignored me, as if I were invisible. I whispered into the silence, addressing the entire house. This time, it belongs to someone who won't abandon it. On the day of my return to the house, I put on gloves, not because of the cold, but for a firm grip. Dust, like a shroud, covered every inch, and cobwebs, like sticky memories, clung to the corners. But there was no fear. I'd been through worse. Sarah, my loyal companion, followed me through the corridors. By the fireplace, she stopped, surveying the spot where Jason Miller had once unsuccessfully tried to install his pretentious mirrored sculpture. "This place has a soul," she whispered, touching the rough stone of the mantelpiece. "It just needs someone who won't suffocate it with their sorrow." "I know what it needs," I replied, feeling a spark of hope ignite in my chest. "It needs meaning." That week, I worked tirelessly on my plan. Not a banal shop in a shopping mall, but a creative space, a studio boutique for kindred spirits. Something special. A place where people would feel like they had stepped into a magical fairy tale. Bespoke journals, keepsake boxes for cherished memories, elegant calligraphy lessons, seasonal workshops in a sun-drenched room, writers' gatherings by a crackling fireplace. Marcy, my steadfast support, helped me navigate the legal intricacies and financial matters. And Sarah introduced me to local artisans, mostly women, quietly and persistently, preserving their crafts from oblivion. We transformed the walls, bathing them in sunny honey and soft plum hues. We ripped up the dusty carpets, exposing and polishing the floorboards, as if restoring them to life. Every drawer, every corner, even the chipped baseboard, everything passed through my hands. I wasn't just reclaiming this place. I was rewriting it, page by page. And then I decided on a small but bold step. In the hallway, like a beacon, appeared a framed note. Once, silence and emptiness reigned here. Now, this space craves stories, voices, new beginnings. Welcome home. K. We scheduled the opening for mid-October. No large-scale advertising, just word of mouth, a few photos on Kindred Page's Instagram, and a modest invitation to the local newspaper to write a short piece. But they exceeded all expectations. The reporter, a young woman named Cassie, simply fell in love with the place. She interviewed me for an hour, asking deep, insightful questions, and photographed everything: the exhibits, the classes, the garden lovingly replanted by Sarah's niece. And then, 2 days later, the article came out. From heartbreak to handmade, woman transforms ex-husband's mansion into community center. I wasn't expecting that headline, and I certainly didn't think Jason Miller would see it. But he did. That Saturday, as I was engrossed in preparing materials. For a memory journal workshop, Marcy burst into the kitchen, phone in hand. Her eyes held a strange combination, half amazement, half steel. "He knows," she blurted out, nodding at the phone. "Jason Miller. Someone sent him the article. He already left a voicemail. I didn't listen to that garbage, just read the transcript. It's something like, 'Are you kidding me? Buy my house? Turn it into God knows what? Do you even realize how this makes me look?' I slowly exhaled, trying to remain calm. It took him this long to realize what I'm creating, I thought. He was sure he'd kicked me out of his life, and that was the end of it. But in reality, he just gave me freedom. I deleted his voicemail, then walked into the bright room where two women were eagerly browsing my handmade cookbooks. "Let me know if you need anything," I said, with a warm smile. My venture had outgrown the confines of a small local spot. A popular lifestyle blog reposted the article about me. Then I was contacted by a podcast, not for gossip, but in search of inspiration. I agreed to an interview and sat in that very sunny room where Jason Miller once called me boring. I looked out at the garden, feeling the truth pour out. "I was silent for too long," I said. And silence isn't always a sign of grace. Often, it's just fear. At that moment, I felt a surge of strength and self-assurance. I was no longer afraid to speak my mind. A wave of responses overwhelmed me. Letters, emails, women stopping by the shop not to buy anything, but just to say thank you. A retired nurse, a single mother, a widow, quietly whispering, "You reminded me that I still have a whole book ahead of me." One afternoon, the bell above the door announced a visitor, and I looked up, expecting to see Sarah or Marcy. But it was Jason Miller, thinner, with a gaunt face, wearing a jacket clearly out of season. There was no anger in him, just all-consuming lostness. I didn't flinch. I simply carefully folded a linen napkin on a basket of dried lavender and calmly said, "We're about to start a class." He stood frozen in the middle of the room, looking around. Bookshelves, the soft light of hanging lamps, smiling faces. It was all foreign to him. "I didn't think you'd actually buy it." His voice was quiet. "I didn't do it to get back at you. I know," he replied, even quieter. "And that's the worst part." I remained silent. He had already turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "You were never just a housewife," he said, without looking at me. "I just didn't know how to be with someone who didn't need me." And he left. I didn't follow him. A quiet voice behind me whispered, "Are we starting?" I turned around and a smile bloomed on my face. "Yes, right now." Winter crept in silently that year, like a cat, bringing with it a softness I had long forgotten. The days grew shorter, but the darkness didn't deepen. Every evening, as I saw the last visitor out, I turned off the fairy lights, as if folding the pages of a favorite book, carefully, with feeling. We grew slowly, thoughtfully. We began collaborating with a local women's shelter, holding monthly journaling workshops. Sarah took 2 apprentices under her wing. Marcy finally allowed herself a well-deserved rest, although she still stopped by for tea on Fridays, keeping a close eye on me to make sure I wasn't underselling custom orders. The rhythm and meaning have returned to my life. One morning, I froze in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, now a cozy reading room with velvet armchairs and wide, low bookshelves. In the corner, curled up, sat a woman. Gray strands of hair were hidden under a knitted hat, and she held a new diary in her hands, filling its pages. Noticing me, she smiled. "I thought I would never pick up a pen again," she said in a voice as fragile as old lace. "But here you seem to remember who you were before life tried to make you forget." I sat down next to her. "That's exactly why I created this place." Jason Miller gradually disappeared from conversations. His name was mentioned less and less, like an echo of the distant past. I heard snippets of rumors. Some said he had moved in with a cousin. Others claimed he had found a job managing a warehouse somewhere out of state. But these stories no longer hurt. They seemed like ghostly echoes of a dream I no longer tried to unravel. The keys to the mansion hung on a makeshift hook in the kitchen. Every time my fingers touched the metal, memories surfaced. Not of what I had lost, but of what I had managed to defend. My voice, my name, my strength. They say revenge brings satisfaction. But I found something more. Peace.